Welcome to our webinar, State of Orthopedics, Expert Advice to Conquer Uncertainty. Orthopedics is facing an unprecedented moment. The spread of the coronavirus halted orthopedic surgeries, disrupted supply chains, postponed deadlines of major regulations, delayed new product launches, and has forced many in the industry to navigate these challenges in a newly remote and virtual world. OrthoWorld currently estimates that orthopedic product sales worldwide will be down about 12% in 2020. Yet, as these challenges present themselves, important decisions need to be made in order to get products to hospitals and ultimately to patients and to meet strategic objectives. I'm Carolyn Lowell, BoneZone's Chief Content Officer, and joining me today are 4 members of our advisory board. Today, our panel will share their experiences in recent months and will offer advice on how to tackle these pressing supply chain, regulatory, and product development issues. Our webinar format will be a fireside chat, and panelists will engage in discussion around the topics, and they will be sharing their knowledge and expertise with each other and with you. So to introduce you to our panelists, our moderator is Jeff Tiber, founder, president, and CEO of Tiber Medical. He has a product development and R&D background with previous experience at Extremity Medical, Aesculap, and MedShape Solutions. Howard Levy is Vice President of Global Sourcing at Zimmer Biomet. He is accountable for Zimmer Biomet's direct and indirect sourcing, and he is responsible for supply chain operations related to surgical instruments and trauma. Sharon Starowitz is a regulatory consultant. She spent 22 years at Johnson & Johnson. Most recently, she served as Director of Regulatory Policy Innovation for Global Orthopedics, where she was responsible for providing strategic regulatory guidance and was focused on shaping evolving global regulatory policies. And Dale Tempko is an industry advisor to both orthopedic OEMs and contract manufacturers. He spent 15 years at Medtronic Spinal and Biologics. He was the director of the Medtronic Spinal R&D Center in Beijing, and he also held the position of engineering program manager in R&D. Before I hand it over to our great lineup of speakers, I do want to say a few words about our sponsor. Lincotech Medical is a fully integrated global contract manufacturer for orthopedic, trauma, spine, and dental markets. The company is a recognized expert in casting, machining, plasma spray coatings, and additive manufacturing technologies in the medical field. Lincotech's disruptive, renewed strategy allows the company to provide true concept to launch support to its OEM customers. In today's webinar, our speakers are going to be touching on multiple responsibilities regarding the orthopedic device development process and supply chain solutions and relationships. And Lincotech Medical assists its orthopedic customers during all stages of their manufacturing journey, from device conception, development, and manufacturing, through to finishing and polishing and eventual packaging. This integration by Lincotech Medical simplifies the supply chain and shortens the overall lead time for customers. With decades of experience and a continuous strengthening of its development, engineering, and manufacturing expertise, Lincotech Medical provides a unique and comprehensive portfolio of services for orthopedic companies globally. Thank you to Lincotech for sponsoring today's webinar. 2 quick housekeeping items. We will hold a Q&A after the discussion, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. Additionally, this webinar will be available on demand and will alert you via email once you can access it. Jeff, I am going to hand it over to you now to start the conversation.
Assuming now you guys can hear me, is that correct? Perfect.
Yes.
Before we begin, I just want to thank the fantastic staff at OrthoWorld. I think you guys have done a tremendous job continuing to keep the industry well informed about all the challenging and critical issues going on. So again, thank you on behalf of myself and our panelists. Thank you guys and the audience as well. I think obviously I don't think any individual on the panel or in attendance or listening to this webinar would have expected that 2020 would have started out like this. I think for us, we all looked at a really exciting 2019 increasing momentum from 2019 into 2020, to really have kind of the world that we know frozen, and the way that we do things kind of every single day change. I know for myself, at Hyper Medical, we had to go with basically virtual, a split between virtual and remote. So 60% of our employees stayed on site as essential employees, 40% of which went remote. Of the 3 panelists with us, each of these individuals are still currently remote, as I suspect a number of the audience as well. And so to start out with, I think one of the things that I'd like to really kind of look at is the global, really kind of the global impact of the coronavirus. And, Howard, let's start with you. I think you've managed just a fantastic global supply chain. My understanding is you really saw the impacts of this early on. And just to hear from you, share your stories a little bit about what you saw, some of the mitigations you've done, and then really kind of the go-forward strategy that you have. I think that would be a great start, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon to everybody who's on the webinar today, and thanks to Carolyn for coordinating everything here. Yeah, we kind of followed the COVID around the world. We have operations in China, so obviously we saw that right away after Chinese New Year. The world's largest migration of people coming back to work got disrupted with COVID happening in China. Even if you weren't in the Wuhan area, it disrupted other provinces as far as people returning. So we immediately saw it there, but then we thought, well, it's just happening in Asia. And then lo and behold, it then became an alert for us in northern Italy. And in fact, Lincotech, who's the sponsor of this session, was one of our key suppliers. They supplied 5 of our facilities. So in late February, which is well before, we had any kind of alert here in North America, they were already training their people in COVID-19 protocols. And things really broke, as many people recall, very difficult in northern Italy with the surge. That was probably the first surge in the Western Europe, as well as before the U.S. They really did step up. It was amazing what they had to go through as a company there. And basically, they had people coming into work and not having issues in supporting our supply. They had to go through police quarantines. They had to go through longer commutes, and they heroically really stepped up to that challenge. So I would just call out to them, grazie mille, for all the efforts that they did in that regard. But, that was kind of a precursor to what we also saw in the U.S. I would give a lot of credit to our supply base across the U.S. too. It started breaking out where California was going to shut down independently. Pennsylvania was going to shut down. There were all these state laws coming out. So, one of the things, we talk about conquering uncertainty. I don't know if you can completely conquer uncertainty, but I did call my best friends in legal and started working and coordinating with them, with our corporate governmental relations people, because it did come out very soon thereafter in the U.S. when this moved from Western Europe to the U.S., and we provided this to our European suppliers as well as our U.S. suppliers, that we worked with legal and governmental relations that medical device employees were deemed essential. And that was really essential for us to keep our supply chain going forward. And we greatly appreciated the efforts of all of our suppliers to work with us in that regard. And so suddenly the role that we had in sourcing and supply chain shifted from the traditional, let's acknowledge a purchase order, let's talk about pricing, let's talk about other things, to how do we work together as partners to make sure during this unprecedented time, you need what you need from us to keep operating your supply chain and being successful in that regard. So we teamed up in many of these letters that we wrote for our suppliers saying that they're essential medical device workers, I know kept them able to operate and work forward accordingly and supply us. So that was kind of the start of it, was just the basics of how do we partner together for supply. It then shifted to some other things which were totally unexpected, and I know many of our suppliers and other OEMs have, I'm sure, had this experience, where there was this mad scramble for personal protective equipment and masks. So initially, when it broke out in China, we were shipping masks to China. When China resolved and settled down, we were shipping masks from China back to Europe and back to the US. So we suddenly went into this other level of what was required to protect our employees, as well as to support our commercial people, because as they were going into hospital settings, it became bring your own PPE to be able to support the surgeons and such. So it was a very exciting, but, obviously stressful period of time as we were going through this, because we saw the demand for elective surgeries plummet, basically around mid-March to mid-May over this period of time. And then there's been this kind of recovery as we're going forward right now that was much quicker than people expected overall, but now we see, COVID resurging again. So with that whole global, kind of environment that we dealt with, I mean, the key thing I would continue to reinforce with the suppliers and other OEMs out there is, we are still in this situation, and what do we need to continue to do to make sure we flex dynamically to support, making sure we can support our customers, we can support patients who really are in a lot of pain, who need a knee surgery, who need a hip surgery, who maybe need a trauma plate. How do we continue to make sure that in this environment where COVID is surging again, we are focused on continuing to support through the full supply chain and flex wherever we can to continue to support the hospitals and patients with our desperately needed products.
Yeah, Howard, I know for us at Titan Medical, I mean, we believe really, kind of good communication with our supply base and our vendors is really critical. I once heard a story that you were probably the most traveled individual in Zimmer Biomet. And I believe, today, I mean, you haven't, since the pandemic has hit, you really haven't done any travel. Is that correct? So,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so I was just curious. I mean, you're managing this large global supply chain that went from this very human interaction relationship to really virtual. I mean, for the team on the, listening in, what advice do you have as you transition to that?
Well, I think you need to continue to have a lot of communications. Everyone's doing, the various video conferencing, apps that are out there. And, one of the things we did initially too is we did have like a supplier webinar on best practices that we had internally at Zimmer Biomet on COVID-19, as well as things that we recommended for our suppliers. We've continued to do that. We've been doing these, what we call weekly coffee OpExes with our suppliers, from a variety of different topics. This week's actually was, make sure your safety protocols are still in order internally, that you're doing social distancing, that you're wearing masks at the suppliers, and that no matter, how urgent the business issue is, that needs to be there first before our Zimmer Biomet employees will come into your facility, and vice versa. You should hold our people to that same level of accountability, that our people need to be up with the latest protocols. So, we've had a variety of different educational topics with the suppliers, like how to do a Zimmer Biomet first article inspection, how to do commingle prevention, and, the excitement of doing an FMEA training and all these other kind of things. So we try to keep, using the WebEx world, try to keep some contact out there. It's admittedly sometimes more of a one-way kind of communications in that regard. With our team, I mean, it has really been an area of challenge to sort through. How do you continue to stay connected? How do you continue to bring out new products? How do you really understand people, across the globe, on issues that were, if you were there in person, you can have a quick meeting. And what is a misunderstanding and what requires 3 meetings later to get resolved via WebEx, you used to be able to do that a lot quicker, and you'd have the informal. I think the key is, at least at Zimmer Biomet, a lot of us have been around now for a decent period of time. And at least amongst the sourcing team and our suppliers, there's been a good amount of continuity. So, I don't know if we have it like Phil Jackson used to have with the Bulls and then the Lakers, that we have the triangle offense down, but we do have a lot of good continuity and relationships where our suppliers know us at this point in time and know where we're heading. So I think that's been helpful for us, is that, we're not mixing things up all that much compared to where we were before. But Jeff, there is definitely inefficiencies that we lose in communications, especially globally.
That's certainly understood. So Sharon, let me switch over to you. Obviously, the big part of managing a global supply chain is, the changes with everything going on with MDR, the simple things as auditing your suppliers. From your perspective in really the quality in the regulatory world, what would you say the number one impact is with COVID and, again, the remoteness, the auditing? that you've seen the challenges, and what advice do you have to kind of navigate those through?
Sure. And first, just thanks to everybody for joining today, and certainly to Bone Zone and Lincoln Tech for sponsoring this. I think all these opportunities to have these discussions are really fruitful. And I think, frankly, we're all learning together, right, as things continue to evolve. So many thanks there. Yes, Jeff, I would say for the EU MDR, just to make a couple of remarks on that. Certainly, we've been talking about this for many years now. Things have been evolving, and I'm sure many on the call today know that a significant event happened this spring. In April, the European Medical Device Regulation was actually amended to essentially effectively push out for one additional year the date when the MDR would go into full force. And so that was going to take place this past May 26, 2020. That has now been extended to May 26, 2021. So what is the significance of that? Is that an opportunity for companies to take their foot off the gas? No, of course not. And it certainly raises a lot of practical considerations for manufacturers as well, too. And I would say certainly one of the impact that it's had has been really to look at not only as manufacturers look at their product portfolios. Certainly, there's a lot of rationalization that's going on now because of EU MDR, but because of the delay, the 1-year delay. Certainly issues and questions arise around maintaining products under MDD, which is of course allowed through May 25th, 2024. But with that, as you're probably aware with MDR, as soon as a manufacturer makes what's known as a significant change, then that triggers or is a threshold point for that product to require following the European MDR. So there's a lot of discussions underway right now between manufacturers and notified bodies, really to try to understand, a lot of the nuances, frankly, of the regulation, and to understand in particular what is a substantial change versus a significant change. And I know that there have been guidance documents issued recently in this area, but I do think this is an area that manufacturers are still struggling with a bit. It's representing a challenge to really truly understand, because obviously with a product portfolio that lives on, there will be product changes, design changes, material changes, manufacturing changes. And so really, I think it's really important for companies to maintain that connection with your notified bodies, to have those discussions so there are no surprises, and to really truly understand, what are those particular threshold changes that really would be, would be those trigger points for MDR. I think the other backdrop of what's occurring here too is Brexit. We've all heard about Brexit on the news, and whether that would go forward or not, and it did. And so Brexit, again, is the UK's separation from the European Union. That actually occurred back in December, the end of last year. And I'm sorry, that actually occurred in January 31st. And we are now looking, the transition is January 31st of 2020. And so what does that mean? So effectively, not only do companies need to look at managing decisions around conversion of product portfolio to the Medical Device Directive, to the EU MDR, but also effectively, come January, there will not be effectively, MDR will not be implemented in the UK. And what was the result? Literally, with the impact of the delay of the MDR by 1 year, that now falls outside what's called retained EU law. So that will not, the date that the EU MDR will go into effect will now fall outside of the date for the Brexit transition. So with that, companies now will be looking to follow a new conformity route in the UK that will involve new markings, UK conformity assessment or UKCA mark for their products. And although CE marking will continue to be recognized until June of 2023 to allow transition to the UK route, most products currently covered under the CE mark will fall onto the new conformity assessment route. But that being said, it's yet another complexity, I would say, in the overall impact of EU MDR, the delay of EU MDR implementation, and then certainly to manufacturer having to consider planning for that transition, ensuring all of the necessary documentation is in place, ensuring that the product has the proper mark at the time that it's required, and having UK designated notified bodies. So a lot of complexity has been introduced, not only with the delay of the EU MDR by 1 year, but also the impact that's had with Brexit and the requirement for now yet another conformity assessment route for manufacturers. So a lot of things going on. I would say, certainly COVID has had an impact. Clearly is one of the main drivers for, for the delay in the EU MDR in order to ensure that continued availability of safe medical devices in the EU market. But I would say a lot of the springboard effects or follow-on effects of that really should certainly be taken into consideration. And so, simple decisions like bringing over if you have an orthopedic portfolio with multiple sizes, do all sizes need to go over to and follow the medical device regulation? What can live under MDD versus MDR? These are all really complex decisions. And so I guess my message would be just to obviously remain very well connected to your business partners. Clearly, there's a huge impact in design changes. So clearly, R&D is a key stakeholder in this, and certainly supply chain as well. It's really, in many ways, like a chess game, I think, mapping out all of the different timing and looking at different opportunities to leverage product portfolio, but also, looking at all of these changes. And quite frankly, these are the dates that we know today. They could very well be subject to change in the future. So having that degree of connectedness, communication across all of aspects of the business will be really key, I believe, to ensure compliance and ensure efficient route to marketing and really uninterrupted product supply as well too for the products that are currently sold in these markets.
So Sharon,
I know. Go on, please.
Yeah, Sharon, Europe's is under kind of a second wave, a big second wave of COVID. And you mentioned maybe there's a chance. What do you think the chances that they're going to push the date back again?
I have learned not to trust my crystal ball, Dale, anymore. But I don't know. I see that date looming right now. I see that January 1st date looming, and we're not that far off from it now. I do see that date may be revisited, the transition date for Brexit, but who knows? Your bet is your guess is probably as good as mine.
I can tell you, Dale and Sharon, I can tell you our position is, despite COVID, we are actively pursuing the MDR. Since the pandemic hit, we've had 3 audits related to MDSAP, MDD audit, and MDR audit, all of which, by the way, have been remote. And I think the big thing that we've been driving amongst our quality and regulatory and R&D team is you can't bet on the date moving. You just need to bet on what your plan is, what your execution is, and that's really what you have to drive to. And I think that's an important piece. I think the second thing I would just highlight is that the notified bodies, whether it's TV or BSI or the others, or even the FDA, they're in the exact same position as all of us, where a majority of them are remote. I know, through I think some of the OSMA meetings, a lot of the FDA's resources has been allocated to the vaccine and acceleration of kind of those. And I think it's really important that these audits that are now remote, and they may, and it goes same for vendor audits as well, is that you really have to have good organization for it, right? You should have your data room set up that you're ready to share files readily available. They're digital, right? We've used the WebEx or Zoom platforms with our auditors. And we've also still set up, kind of the war room, right? Where we have our quality and regulatory team isolated so that they can directly, facilitate those audits through. And I think the last piece that's really important, and it goes to Howard, I think the comment that you've made, is it's about good safety protocol, right? And I think when we have auditors or visitors come in, you should not be sacrificing the safety of your team or an auditor if they are coming on site. And you really need to insist that they follow the policies. And I think one of the things that we struggle with at Tiber in the state of Pennsylvania is we have a mandatory 2-week quarantine list. And we've not quite effectively figured out how to utilize that. But one thing that we have done that I think has proven really useful is we've actually set up a remote office. And so we can still have visitors on site. It's a big open space. We go through a safety protocol checklist. And we really ask, and we ask them, everybody is masked up. And so, I think just hearing kind of the challenges for the MDR, right, the vendor side of it, I think it's really important that as we adapt to this new future around these, is it's the over communication. And when you have to be in person, if you have to be in person, right, you really take those safety protocols seriously.
Yeah, excellent point. And Jeff, and I would also add to just, I think you struck on a point, and it's not just a MDR point, but really a point around audits in general right now, whether they be FDA inspections, whether they be clinical, inspections. Many companies have ongoing clinical studies. How do you manage that perspective in company internal audits, and as well as being audited by regulatory health authorities. And I do think that, particularly for internal audits, it's going to be really important to look at prioritizing, right? Looking at the feasibility. Not every audit can be done remotely. Really having good risk management principles applied as to, what would be prioritized in terms of those audits. And I do think that manufacturers will really have to. There'll be a lot more in the pre-planning phase to really make those audits effective. Looking at how, kind of agreeing on the rules of the road, if you will, in advance with the auditor. How will we share, files? How will we share records? How will we preserve confidentiality? A little different than having an auditor come into a room and, handing a document and then taking it away. So I think all of the rules around data protection and confidentiality, I think, will be new things that companies will have to work through and define. And I will say too, even in your management reviews and your documentation of those audits, to look at really truly capturing, particularly for those remote audits, what areas, how they were conducted, kind of some of the guidelines for them, and where things were not, frankly, able to be effectively audited, having that justification and rationale as well too. To pick up those areas, perhaps on next opportunity to do an on-site audit. So definitely presenting new opportunities and challenges in that area.
And just one thing to add, Jeff, on that too is from our perspective, we have a number of key third-party complete suppliers who basically own the design for us and partner with us. So that's another area for us. I mean, we're doing things that we feel are pretty well under control within Zimmer Biomet with our traditional contract manufacturers. But that's another area for other third parties to really differentiate themselves and make sure that your OEM partners are confident that you're progressing what you need to do to get your products, approved accordingly going forward. And that's kind of a blind spot, I think, a little bit for the OEMs, is how well are these companies doing it? Because I've seen other issues where there's been acquisitions or name changes, and some of the regulatory requirements aren't fully taken into account when the supplier does change over those kind of things. And suddenly you can't sell their product in the same place as you did previously. And I see that as a potential issue with EU MDR, that, third-party entities like, we partner with Tiber, how do they make sure their systems are going to be fully compliant with EU MDR?
Yes. And that's a great point, Howard. I mean, certainly, as many of you are aware, the MDR really requires additional controls and documentation of, all the entities that are involved, whether they be a third-party supplier, distributor, importer. They are equally, responsible for maintaining certain documentation that shows compliance, to the MDR. So a bit different than perhaps the past medical device directive focus. So having that cooperation, if you will, and awareness of everybody's responsibilities is very important under MDR.
Absolutely. Let's, we touched on it a little bit about kind of the collaboration, right? And maintaining kind of the remote communication. And Dale, I'm going to turn over to you, but I guess the question I would ask is, right, we've been running R&D where it's heavily in-person, collaborative, right, hands-on, get in the cadaver lab, meet with your surgeons, meet at trade shows, get that feedback. And all of a sudden we can't meet. Right, and I think you've seen this firsthand, and I guess what advice would you have as we're managing kind of that new direction for R&D and the communication style?
So I'm working on both sides. I'm working on both the OEM side and the contract manufacturing side, helping folks out, and I see it from both sides. And I'm going to take a side note here. I'm going to back up a little bit to Howard's presentation, and what I see is people that had strong relationships before COVID. Those relationships helped get through the transition of COVID. And even if it's requiring information for EU MDR, we were forcing a lot of suppliers to give us a lot of information under a lot of pressure until people, and I've seen people let off on the gas. So those relationships that we forged over years through, long times and, treating people kind of in a win-win situation, rather than I'm the OEM, I win, and you're the supplier, you lose, that those relationships that were built with certain suppliers and certain OEMs are a little more difficult to do business with than others. I can see it from the contract manufacturer side, how they approached going through a difficult situation. And, we got COVID now. Before this week, we had hurricanes in Puerto Rico and fires in California. And it just, we're going to constantly, I think, be challenged with these types of disruptions to our supply chain. And so forging those good relationships, I think, is more important than ever. Coming back to the question, though, about collaboration on that, I participate in a few conference calls here and there. I'm lucky I don't do it all day long anymore. But what I've noticed is it's more important now than ever to have good project management skills when managing these meetings. I see meetings with 10, 15, 20 people in it, and all of a sudden, there may be an agenda, maybe there is an agenda, people just aren't talking, and all of a sudden they go into a problem-solving mode. Some of the engineers maybe may go off and they're talking about some issue with a quality guy who had a supplier. Everybody else on the conference call, what do? I'll say it kindly, they multitask, but really what they do is they just turn them off and they go off doing something else. You're sitting at home. It's not like you're sitting in a conference room where the guy's saying, oh, the guy's on his phone, he's not listening. So I see this happening. And so I'd say, more than ever, when you have these larger meetings and conference calls, that you need to have an agenda, and they should go very quick. It should basically be, are you on track to hit your date for this task? And the answer is yes. Okay, we go on to the next one. We don't need any other discussion. Those small discussions can be taken offline. If the answer is no, it's really, do you have a new date, and is it on critical path, and do you have the resources you need to resolve it? And if any of those are issues, then you take that offline and you go on to the next task. So you can bang through the things very quickly. I think that keeps people engaged, and it prevents this wandering and multitasking. And as far as collaboration between engineers and people, it's a challenge, but we managed that before. It was a lot easier, to jump off into a lab or something, or go here. But a lot of times we were developing products with people outside the U.S. and, I've had a lot of the panelists, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners, have had conference calls with people in different parts of the world, and you got time zone differences and all that. But we managed, so some of this is new, but some of it isn't. The new part is we're all having to do it. Before, some of us kind of elected to do it, whether we're working with Asia or Europe or India. So now everybody has to do it, and we need to develop those skills to make those meetings and that collaboration work.
Yeah, I think, Dale, you really talked about the project management part of it. I think that's a really important thing. And also, I think the centralization of that information. There are some great Gantt charts and project softwares. There's Rike, there's Smart Sheets, right, which are some of those ones. And they are really easy tools to use when you have a team and you need to manage a lot of that data. And I think to your comment, right, having really effective meetings is really important. At the same time, I certainly encourage our staff that, you can send text messages, you can pick up the phone. You don't always have to do a video conference. You don't always have to get 30 people on the phone and schedule that. And so just because you can't talk face to face, there are still other means of communication. And actually, we've really kind of discouraged emails a little bit. And we said, if you can't pick up the phone, have a quick chat or send a text, right, or use a chat function, then, really look at what you're doing. And so I think the key, and you've mentioned this before, but it's also being protective of other people's time. And as R&D, individuals, or, even, across our industry, as you are scheduling, the different, meetings, making sure, one, you have an agenda if you need it, right? You have people come prepared to address the items. And then two, you almost uninvite individuals that maybe don't need to be in there. And it's just a courtesy to them. And some people obviously want to be in every meeting. But, those are obviously, I think, for us, we found some easy time management. The last thing, and this was an interesting thing, actually, our VP of R&D did this, and I thought it was a phenomenal way to do it, is, we just launched a nice, or we just got FDA approval on a beautiful anatomical plating system, and during the development for that system, we needed to do a lot of kind of surgeon feedback. And with travel being shut down, with our ability to send an engineer out to go sit with the surgeon, or even go into the hospital, which is just not allowed, we had to really reinvent how we got that feedback. And they actually would build validation kits. And so they would literally get either sawbone, and they would 3D print or have physical product. They would produce it, and then they would send it, via really a validation care package to the doctor. They'd have a scheduled time to have a WebEx or a video Zoom conference. And they would literally walk through the validation steps with that surgeon and collect feedback right there. Even though they weren't there, they still were there. And I think those have been some ways where we've tried to leverage as much as the video platforms, but also just some of the hands-on that we used to do. And I think, again, it goes back to thinking outside of the box on there. And so, again, that was just one tidbit that I had.
Yeah, and I would just add too, from the standpoint of the project management, really being critical in that leadership in that regard, and the follow-up of the team on what are the really important issues. But I think it is kind of this kind of mix of skill base now where, you're very oriented towards, the technically based project management, while at the same time, making that extra phone call to somebody to clarify what's really going on. And it makes it even more important. Like a lot of times you have people within a key project or within your company, who are the people everyone goes to. And those people are even more important now, but they may be suffering from also too many conference calls or, just, constantly being the go-to people. But you kind of need that balance of going on of the better, tighter, extra project management of a technical basis, along with, stepping back and informally, making that extra phone call, even though you may be tired from, sitting through 5 conference calls in a row yourself.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff, and Howard, that a couple small phone calls can go a long way, stop email chains, especially the old fire mail chains, when everybody gets on and next thing you know, you look and you got 10 or 12 exchanges on a topic where that whole thing could have been resolved offline without involving a lot of people.
And we had this stuff before COVID too. It's just, I think it's just taken even more highlight just because we're not in the same buildings and, communicating closer and more informally.
For sure. I mean, I think that we're all working harder, because it's a little bit more difficult to do to do our task in COVID and working from home. I think having a conversation with my son who's working remote, I think eventually we're all going to get a little bit better feel for this. But right now, it's really important to use our time wisely. Yeah.
Howard, obviously, go on, Sharon.
Sorry, I'm just curious to know, with back to MDR, because it does touch so many aspects of the business. and things are constantly evolving. I just love to hear your impressions in terms of, getting the information. How do you manage that with your teams and ensure everybody's in the loop? And then where there are critical decisions to be made, like portfolio rationalization or design change, or when do we go MDR? What do we hold back? Just curious to know if you feel that that's changed, that level of communication as a result of people working remotely, or maybe there's some advantages of accessibility.
Yeah, from a Zimmer Biomet standpoint, I mean, we did have a lot of preparation going into, making the proverbial lemonade out of the lemons and using it as an opportunity for portfolio rationalization. We suffer from a lot of SKUs and made some hard decisions in that. So that was something strategically we did going into it as we looked at our portfolio and what we really needed to do to meet EU MDR. We did keep on an ongoing basis in an executive steering committee moving forward and making sure, even with, the new deadline, that we would still continue forward with the executive leadership commitment and alignment to what resources may be needed, as far as ensuring that we will have full compliance. And so I think that's important, that you just, don't, as these dates change, whether it's an NPI, new product introduction project, EU MDR, or whatever it is, you still think about how do you use that time to best leverage the resources that you need to get it done. So you're not doing it by the seat of your pants. Like many of us have lived through, various new product development launches, and you've always wished, why couldn't we do a little bit more design for Six Sigma or design for manufacturing assembly up front? I think that's kind of a lesson learned as we're going through, whether, dates move out on new product development or EU MDR. You still need to keep the wheels of progress going. It may not be quite as many resources that you had upfront loaded in, doing that sanity check, but I don't think you can take your foot off, the gas on these kind of initiatives that you have to get there anyway. And maybe you can do a better job, like I described. Maybe you can step back and say, okay, I need to remediate this, but can I work with our suppliers to do design for manufacturing assembly with this additional time?
Yeah, I think just to add on just a couple other comments, Sharon. I think the other thing is, obviously the healthcare systems have been impacted. And with that, there are, I think functions within the healthcare system that maybe have more available time. And excuse me, I think the research side is one of them. And so I think as you're looking at the MDR and certainly the CE marking requirements for post-market clinical follow-up, I do believe that there's some good opportunity right now for really engaging institutions for gathering some of that post-market clinical follow-up. And, I know we've seen it. We're able to, pre-pandemic, it was hard to get attention. When everybody is not doing, not operating, it's easier to get attention. And I think there is still opportunity as the volume is starting to swing back to take advantage of that. And it is a big component that doesn't just happen overnight with MDR.
Yes, the whole concept of sufficient clinical evidence and what does that mean? How do we get it? And you're absolutely right, continually collecting that information and data for products that are, on the market, and even planning for, those plans and strategies moving forward. Yes, and I agree that there are creative ways to perhaps approach that, and maybe this is an opportune time too to look at the institutions and work with them in developing those plans.
So we have another 5 minutes before we're going to open up to some Q&A. But just real quick, Dale, I think coming from, again, last year when we were doing product launches, looking at doing a product launch, this year and in the future, just share with us a little bit of your thoughts on what that looks like. How would you kind of project manage that to really set up a post-pandemic, product launch?
I think it still gets back to some of the basic fundamentals. And you talked about doing design verification in a unique way, but one of the whole keys comes back to getting your user needs and design inputs, and I did a webinar a little bit earlier for Ortho World on also looking at business inputs. The things that drive our designs are not only customer needs, but also business needs, whether it's IP, whether it's regulatory, whether it's finance and costing. All those things need to be identified upfront. Okay. You can develop products that aren't successful, right? And what does successful mean for the business? That's it. Sometimes you do things for strategic reasons, but typically you want to make money. So whether it's costing and all these different things, you really need to look at that up front. And I don't know if COVID really affected that, but I see that now more than ever, that you really need to be in tune with not only what the customers want, but what your own business needs to develop successful products. And from project management, I always ask questions. Well, who's supposed to put all that together? And it really comes down to somebody needs to do it. I don't know whether it's the design engineer or somebody, but the design decisions that are chosen, that we formulate in design outputs, all come from user needs and should be able to be traced back. And if they can't, something's misaligned, or the engineer went off and did something he wanted to do and may not be aligned with what the business needs or a customer needs. So whether it's project management doing that or somebody thinking through and documenting, it's not hard. Okay. DFEMAs and some things like that. Yeah, those are hard, right? And tracking all the inputs and outputs, it's onerous, but it's not like it can't be done. So I really think that to develop successful products post-COVID, especially, it's going to be more important now than ever to really document and understand what it is you're trying to develop and what the restrictions are and what the goals are of both the customer and the company.
And Dale, that's excellent. I would just add also product claims, really thinking about what you want to say about that product, because certainly with MDR, that's going to take on a heightened importance, as well as having the documentation, whether it's mechanical, bench, or clinical, to really support those claims.
Yep, agree.
So just to take us into the Q&A real quick, Howard, one piece of advice that you'd give our audience, what would it be?
Well, I mean, there is an advantage that you do have a captive audience. So as I mentioned before, it's a great time actually for training and personal development for people. A lot of people aren't doing the commute that, for a variety of people could be, it could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour that they've had as a commute. So, I think as people are looking at, their career trajectory, their development, and again, it's kind of a challenging time professionally as well as personally for people, with the circumstances that each individual may have, with, a relative who could be ill or having to take care of children who aren't in school. But I think one of the things that, depending on the person and you're looking forward to the future, is this a good time to be able to further, your career development? Are there things you can do to learn, and if you haven't gone back for an MBA, if you haven't gone back for a certification in project management, if there's something take your career to the next level, again, how do you take advantage of this situation? If it's, you're in the right personal and professional circumstances to take advantage of e-learning and leverage something like that. And I think that is also good if you're leading teams, to give people an idea, okay, it's not the greatest time in the world necessarily right now, but on the other hand, here's an opportunity for you to continue to develop with your company and to continue to develop and grow your skills, and give people, hey, we're going to get over this in the future, but stay on that path that you can continue to improve and feel good about it.
Yeah. Sharon, what would your advice be for the audience?
Yeah, I would just simply say maybe a slightly different tack is keep the lines of communication not only open within your company, but also with the regulators as well. We spent a lot of time today talking about EU MDR, and certainly keeping in touch with the notified bodies, trying to identify areas where perhaps companies might be getting conflicting direction from notified bodies, raising those issues, and really working through those so everybody is really aligned. But even on the FDA side as well too, or any other health authority, just really continuing to to stay engaged, to ask the questions as they escalate them where there needs to be additional clarity or guidance, and look for opportunities to work together. I know there's been some great examples on the MDR side where industry has partnered. I'm thinking particularly on the spine up classification, to work with the notified bodies to try to gain some consensus. So I would just sum it up by saying, keep communicating, raising areas that are still unclear, and there are a number of them, and try to work together on those areas where it makes sense to work together as an industry.
Great advice. Dale, do you have any additional advice for the team in the audience?
Yeah, one thing real quick is that, I talked to a lot of different people, and here, especially like in the last 4 to 6 months, I've seen a lot of developments, both in manufacturing techniques and materials available. And if I wasn't talking to people, I wouldn't have come across these things. And so there's a lot of developments going on that can help both manufacturing and our contract manufacturers and R&D and things like that. And our normal channels for getting that information are kind of limited right now. So do some time, like Carol says, you spend some of the time you were going to do, spend commuting, and read your bone zone. Already be push right now to attend OMTech next year, and because these things are happening, guys, they're happening, and some people are going to be in tune, or you're going to be left out, and it's across all the fronts. It's all types of developments, whether it's EU MDR stuff that's changing or new materials that are available. People are continuing to do work. Everything hasn't stalled out, so do an effort, make some effort to find out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. At this point in time, we'll open up the floor. If there are any questions that the audience or participants have, please let us know.
Our first one, what's your advice for maintaining a forward trajectory with so much uncertainty? Is it naive to approach uncertainty as just a state of mind?
I'll jump in. I mean, that's a pretty philosophical question, but I would say I think one of the things that's helped us as we looked at things is, continue to focus on what your near-term objectives are. And, some of this is the usual business things that you need to accomplish. And we talked a lot about those things. You got an exciting new product launch coming, make sure you launch it. You've got, some supply commitments, make sure you support it. So I think some of this is keeping that normal going as much as you can, and kind of, the spirit of calm is contagious, that as leaders in our organizations, that we continue to show that leadership of, these are the things we'll need to get through, keep an eye out for the longer term and build towards the longer term as well as your strategy. And, this too shall pass as we go through it. So I think there's this kind of, juxtaposition a little bit between how do you keep things normal in an, basically in a kind of surreal world, but at the same point in time, I think we as a leadership group with our people and with our teams, need to keep us hitting the things that we said we were going to hit as much as we can, or respond flexibly accordingly, but do it in the right way.
I would add to that,
Howard,
I use a stock market, and anybody that knows me knows I'm not risk adverse, is buy low, sell high, right? So right now there's a lot of companies that are doing that exact same thing right now. They're kind of pulling back and waiting to see what's happening. They're waiting for the market to go up, and then they're going to buy. And then, so don't miss an opportunity.
Yeah, I would add also, I think, our philosophy here, stagnation is the enemy, and to just stop is probably the worst thing you can do. And I think it goes from everything from product development to even supply chain, is when you're looking at a cold start on something that, you change from a lead time to maybe it's 8 weeks or 90 days up to 200 in some cases, or you can't restart it. And I think it is important, this time will pass. It's passed in the past. It's, we've gotten through these pandemics, and it's important to continue to move forward. And I think that the last piece that I would just add on to that, I think also the communication is really a two-way street, and it goes, it goes up and down. It goes internal. It's also external. And the piece that I would encourage, those in device companies or suppliers is, while there's a tendency to hold information, it's also okay to share with your partners kind of the direction that you think you're going to go in the future, to try to get input from them, because you may learn something, you may be able to adjust something, you may learn that maybe a decision that you thought was critical that needs to be made, it doesn't need to be made in a little bit. So again, I just really would over communication, both internally but also externally.
Yeah, Jeff, I think that's a really good point, because we've done a number of like sales and operations planning meetings with a number of our suppliers, because of the, sometimes demand from OEMs can be a roller coaster, but this year's been even more special as far as the roller coaster. So, we've tried to do that in coordination with our suppliers in sales and operation planning. But then we've also had key suppliers come to us and say, hey, we really need more information than just your traditional updates. So I would really encourage that two-way communication.
And to continue on with, the conversation about communication, what investments have you personally made or your companies personally made in improving communication skills? Do you have any advice there?
I could jump in, Carolyn. I do a lot of work with Orthopedic Surgical Manufacturers Association, which is a trade association comprised of all companies of all sizes that work in the orthopedic space. And one of the observations, we have educational meetings 4 times a year. And one of my observations through COVID has been really, we've been able to reach a greater audience in terms of the content, the information that we're putting forth. We had up until then, certainly meetings where people would have to travel and get that information and bring it back to the organization. So having the opportunity through a venue like that to communicate either live on a webinar such as this, or to have that information archived for others to tap into, I see has been really a positive outcome in terms of communicating content, making sure everybody is in the loop on all these evolving changes, and also has an opportunity to add to the discussion as well.
And some of ours is formal training and some of it's informal training, Carolyn. So when you look at, the opportunities for people as far as communication skills, for example, we have an active Toastmasters group that meets once a month that's actually regional across the U.S. and it's employee driven. So they give speeches on different topics and it's organized according to the Toastmaster rules. I've encouraged our people to be presenters at OMTech or other conferences, to get out of, the usual of what they do, to have an opportunity to present out something if they're doing something that they think is worthy of sharing across the industry. So it goes from, somewhat more encouraging people at various forums, whether they're internal or something like OMTech. And then there's some, just internal training that we do in communications as well.
Sounds great. I think we are going to leave it there as we're starting to run out of time. Thank you so much to our panel today. You've covered quite a lot of ground. Thank you also to our sponsor, Lincotech Medical, and thank you to everybody who is watching. 2020 has certainly been an eventful year, and I hope you found today's discussion informative as you look to work through your challenges for the remainder of the year and into 2021. As our panelists mentioned, our new virtual world offers really an unbelievable amount of resources to further your professional development. BoneZone does seek to produce webinars every month moving forward. So after today's webinar, you will be receiving a survey. Please share your feedback on today's webinar, the State of Orthopedics, and also let us know what topics you need to learn more about to perform at your peak. So thank you again for watching. Stay well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.